Flying your DJI Mini 2 over water can give amazing shots, but beginners and seasoned flyers can be really nervous about flying their drone over large bodies of water, and rightly so. A simple wind direction change could mean that your drone is never making it back to land. So in this video, I'm going to give you my tips to fly over water safely, and stick around to the end because the last one could save you from losing your drone in a pinch. Let's jump right in. So before I get in and give you my tips about how you can fly over water safely, I just want to say if you learned something new, please make sure to hit the like button. And if you're new around here and like drone related videos and haven't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and make sure the notification bell is on. Let's jump right in. So flying over water. The first thing is make sure you are comfortable with flying your drone over land before you attempt to fly over large bodies of water. It's a misconception, or some people think that when they first start flying a drone, that flying over water is a safer way of flying because they're worried about hitting obstacles, they haven't got the muscle memory of the controls, and they think if they fly over water, there's less chance of them hitting something or having an accident. But the opposite is true. If you're flying over water, there's a lot of nuance and skill required to make sure that if anything goes wrong, you can get your drone home. I'll get into this later in the video. So make sure you're comfortable flying over land first, like a large football field would be ideal, before you attempt to fly over large bodies of water. The next thing I want to say is just make sure to trust your drone. I have lost signal to my DJI Mini 2 a lot of times, and it always returns to home. Two scenarios happen. Either I'm capable, without the screen being on, to fly it up and then using the map in the corner to fly it back to within range, or the return to home kicks in and it always lands safely. I've never lost my DJI Mini 2, so trust your drone. The next thing is, don't listen to a lot of scare stories online. A lot of scare stories online talk about how people lost their drone over water, and 9 times out of 10, it's because of user error. So using these tips I'm about to go over in my video, the chances of you losing your drone over the water are slim. It is possible, but common sense prevails, and using the tips I'll go over in this video, chances are you'll be absolutely fine. So the first, and arguably the most critical thing you need to be aware of is wind. You need to be aware of wind direction more so than ever when you're flying over water. The reason for this is the DJI Mini 2, although it has great wind resistance capabilities, if there is a strong headwind, it can really struggle. And one of the mistakes I've made, and a lot of people only make once, is if you fly your drone out to sea on a tailwind and then turn to fly back on a headwind, you'll all of a sudden realize that your drone might struggle coming back to you because your wind was on your back on the way out, and now it's a head-on wind and it's pushing your drone out as you're trying to fly in, and your drone can struggle to fly back. So there's a couple of ways to prepare yourself for flying over water when it comes to the wind. Firstly, make sure you know the wind direction. You can do this by looking it up online, or you can do this by using an app before you go out flying. The next thing I'll say is do a quick test flight. So don't go a mile out to sea on your first time and then try and turn and come back. Use up one of your batteries, go a couple of 100 meters out to the sea, turn and fly back. Because even if you've got a strong headwind, you can put it in a sport mode and you'll probably be able to fly them couple of 100 meters back on a full battery. The next is, you don't always have to go miles out to sea to get these shots. You don't have to go chasing boats. You can fly out over sea, but stay close to the coastline. And actually quite a lot of the flying I do over water, I stay really close to the coastline or the cliff edge. And what that means is, yes, you're out flying at sea, but if there's ever any issue, you're not that far away and you can fly back to land. Or if, for example, you do get a headwind, you can fly at a slight diagonal and you'll still make it back to a coastline or shoreline, and your drone's much easy to recover. So like I say, do a quick test flight, go out, fly about over the ocean but stay close to the shoreline and be able to gauge the wind. Now, something to be aware of is wind strength usually gets faster, stronger, the higher up you go. So what I find is that even when flying over land, if it's even quite calm, down kind of around head height or really low when you're flying your drone, but you fly up to 120 meters, you can find that you start getting wind warnings on your drone, that there's strong winds. And that's just because the wind speed can change a lot with altitude. So if you're up high out at sea and you find that the wind strength is really high, or you got quite a strong headwind, try lowering your drone, and that will usually allow you to pick up more speed when flying back. The next thing you need to be sure of is that your return to home is set before you fly over the ocean. A really easy mistake to make sometimes is that you can go off flying before your return to home is set. A lot of the times when you first take off your drone, it takes a few seconds for the GPS to fully engage, and then it takes another few seconds for you to get the message to say the return to home has been set. But it's crucial that you allow your drone to hover and this return to home gets set before you go out flying over the ocean, because if there's any issue, disconnection issues, whatever the issue is going to be, the drone is going to try to return to that home location. And if you take off and fly away before your GPS and return to home kicks in, your return to home could have got set somewhere over the shoreline or somewhere over the water. And if your drone tries to return to home and land in water, well, that doesn't have a good ending. So make sure that your return to home is definitely set. Double check it before you fly over the ocean. Now, if you're on a boat and you're flying over the ocean, you need to make sure that you're constantly updating your return to home. Because if you're on a moving boat and you haven't updated your return to home in a minute, or it depends how quickly you're going on your boat, but if you've now moved away from that return to home location and you haven't updated it in your settings, your drone is going to come back and try and land on water. Now in the settings, you can change your loss of transmission signal default to change from return to home to hover. There's maybe scenarios where that would work, but for me that wouldn't, because I normally fly out over the water and fly back. So if I lost signal and it just kept hovering out there over the ocean, up in the air, I'm never going to be able to get out to it because I'm not on a boat. So for me, I don't find that option has many uses, but you may find if you are out in a boat and you lose connection, that for it to just hover instead of trying to return to home would be better, because you could go over to it on your boat. So that's something to be aware of. But just make sure that you're constantly checking your return to home is set. The next thing to be aware of is your drone is not waterproof. And you may think that's quite common sense, but there's a few things you need to be aware of when you're flying over water. Firstly is if you're on a beach or if you're near the coast, when you're taking off and landing, make sure you're not taking off and landing on any stagnant water or any water which is pulled up. Even a little bit could damage your drone. And actually what I find near the beach is if you get an area where there's some water in the surface, it can mix with the sand, and then the wind can actually be blowing that water and sand around and your drone can get covered in it. That will not play nice for your drone, so do be careful. And also when you're out flying over water, and especially if you're flying low over waves, you do not want that salty wave spray over your drone. It will wreak havoc with it. So you need to be careful that not only, even if you're flying close to the water, that overspray of them waves is not getting over your drone. And you need to make sure that if you're flying with your back to the waves, that you don't get a wave coming crashing over you, because that will completely KO your drone. It's not waterproof. You do need to be careful. The next thing is battery considerations. Never ever go flying over water without a full battery. And there's one main reason for this. If you get caught out over at sea and there's a headwind pushing your drone out and you need to put it into sport mode, you would be surprised how quickly sport mode into a headwind can drain your drone battery. You can literally count the percentages down as it's going down. And if you're out of water, a couple of hundred meters out of water, and you're in sport mode and you're only coming back really slowly and you're watching your battery drain, it's a nerve-wracking experience. It would be even more nerve-wracking if you only had half a battery. So make sure you've got full juice in your battery, so in the worst case scenario, you have ample power to make sure your drone can get back to land. So what happens if something goes wrong? You're out at sea, you're getting these great shots, you're super happy with them, and you turn to come home, and all of a sudden you're pushing forward, but your drone's actually flying back. The wind's pushing your drone back and you just don't think you're going to be able to make it to land. You start panicking. There's 3 tips which will almost guarantee you always get your drone back. The first is never use return to home. Now that might seem counterintuitive, but there's a reason for this. If you engage return to home, the first thing your drone will do is fly upwards, because your drone will always fly up to the return to home altitude before it comes home. So you're going to waste precious time with your drone flying upwards before it flies back. You don't want to do that. You just want to get your drone flying forward as quickly as possible. And that actually bleeds into my second tip, which is lower altitude. So I've explained it before, and you probably know this yourself if you fly a lot, that wind strength is much higher altitude and it gets less and less the lower you go. So by also return to home, you're flying your drone higher up into stronger wind, which is pointless. You need to get your drone lower, so lower your altitude. Sometimes you'll find that if your drone's struggling to fly forward because of the wind speed, you can get your drone down quite low and then it comes home fine. The wind speed is so much less at lower altitude that you can just breeze home. So the lower you can go with your drone, more chances than not that the wind strength is going to be less and that you'll be able to fly your drone back. So lower that altitude as much as possible. The last is use full throttle, sport mode, and zigzag. So you need to use sport mode. You need to have as much performance out of them propellers as possible to get back in these scenarios. So make sure it's in sport mode, make sure you're using full throttle, and zigzag. If you've got a strong headwind, you'll make up much more ground if you start to zigzag, because it means you're no longer flying head on into a headwind, you're actually flying slightly diagonal to that headwind, and by zigzagging, you'll more often than not be able to get your drone back safely. So I hope all this information helps you. If you've learned something new, please make sure to hit the like button. And if you're new around here and haven't subscribed, I really would appreciate it if you did. I've got tons more drone content coming up, so make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of them videos. And as always, I really appreciate you watching this video. Thanks for watching.